Tonight's program, Foundation Library, and this is about things that, at least in my opinion, that you must own, truly need to study, and you need to internalize them. And this is Foundation Class 1105. And a part of self-reliance, as far as I'm concerned, is you really need to have a library of things. And you'll either be doing that, making provisions for the future with library, and of course with other things, so that you can meet that future. And if you don't do that, you end up being a victim. And so each one of us has a choice whether we do that or not. One of the reasons for having a library is the ability to study things and to learn principles, to get understanding of how and why things work. Because I believe that principles, understanding these things, is key to being self-reliant. Part of what we want to do, of course, is have an organized structure to, well, this brings focus to things. It helps you bring order. It also helps you to gain efficiency in the things that you need to learn, do, and have. You see, there's an awful lot, and if you just try to work from a list standpoint, it looks so gigantic. So you want to organize things in a way to get your head wrapped around them, because there's things to learn, there's things to do, and there's things to have. And really what this is about is maximizing really the only two things that you have to spend. One is time, the other one is money. Those are the main things we spend, and you don't want to waste any of that. When I talk about preparedness and these principles and laws that don't change, I have quite a long list of them. Some of these 8 we talk about fairly often. I mention them just briefly for anybody that happens to be new. You can study these things in greater depth than some other classes. One of these laws is the law of stewardship, and I believe that's why I'm here, and that's probably why you're here, because it comes down to these 3 things. First off, the authority, and that really comes from the fact that you and I are alive. We've been given the right to act. We live our lives day by day, and number 2 on this list, which is responsibility, and that's acting within the bounds of the authority that we've been given. And we either choose wisely and do correct things, or we don't, because number 3 is the accountability, and that really comes down to the just consequences for all of our actions. Those consequences will either be enjoyable and pleasurable and rewarding, or they may be, challenging, very instructive, painful. They can even be deadly. So may we choose wisely in our day-to-day actions, and some of the actions we take are preparing us for the future. One of these other laws is the law of parachute, and that again is what this is all about. I think we understand what a parachute is. It's something, if you have it before you need it, have it with you when you need it, know how to use it, actually use it, and if it's life-saving quality, then when you fall out of a plane, you don't die. Well, it works just the same, this law of the parachute, when we're talking about being prepared. But in this case, we're talking about our attitudes, knowledge, skills, and supplies, because you see, the disaster, the emergency, life, whatever it is, just does not care. The events happen. It's our responsibility to take care of ourselves. There are 9 areas. I call them preparedness modules, and each one of them is like a parachute, because you have to have all 9 of them in the long run. Foundation, which is about principles and understanding, clothing, water, sanitation, nutrition, shelter, wellness, tools, and supplies are critically important, and you can't cross any one of those off the list in the long run. Maybe for a few hours, a few days, or a few weeks for some, but eventually they all catch up with you. So understand this concept that I believe is very important, that it's not just about having a bunch of stuff that you buy and stick away, and of course having skills. Those are all important. But you see, it's what you know is far more important than what you have. What's inside of your head, what's in your heart, who you are, what you stand for, that is more important than just having a bunch of stuff. Well, these principles we've been talking about, and I just mentioned them for a couple of minutes. You can learn more about them in a couple of places. One of them is online, Foundation Class 1001, which is Prepare to Survive No Matter What. That's free online at Safe Harbor Alliance. And it's a webinar that we did in the past. You can go to the webcasts, and under webcasts, you can find the past webcast, and then there is this Foundation Class 1001. I would encourage you to watch it. Also send people there. That's why we have these things available at no cost, so that we can reach and teach people. The other thing you can do is there is a 2-hour principle-based DVD. It's called Part 1, The Foundation, that is available from Safe Harbor online. And you can purchase that through our website. And I would encourage you to do that also. We sell that one very inexpensively so people can afford to get it. Now, when we're talking about these 9 core preparedness modules tonight in the library, we're really talking about foundation principles and the foundation library in particular. See, true preparedness has to be based on principles, and understand that each one of these 9 areas has its own set of foundation principles. In other words, if you're talking about water, there's things about water that's critically important that you understand how and why things work. And it's not about trying to memorize everything. It's like you have this gigantic list of things and you're supposed to memorize all the details that's in there because it's too much. You see, if you understand how and why things work, interrelationships, then you can figure out what to do. And sometimes you don't necessarily know precisely what to do, but because you have an understanding of principles in the area of water, it's like, we need safe water, we need it not contaminated. Here's the different ways that you can do that. I'm going to have 2 or 3 of them to back each other up, and then I have the concept that I'll have clean water because I understand how to do that, how to make them, how to build them, how to find them. So don't try to memorize these 9 areas and everything that's in it, because really you can't do it. The library will help you learn these things. So the first question would be, what's a library? Well, very simply, it is a collection of published works, and these works can be printed, they can be graphs and pictures, audio and video. It's things that we keep in a form that we can use them again and refer to them, but they're not for sale. It's something that we keep and we use. You have the public libraries where you can go check things out and bring them back. I believe we should have our own personal libraries. And really, it's a collection of reference materials on a particular subject. In our case, it's the subject of, well, how do we prepare ourselves to meet the future no matter what? Some of the parameters when you're thinking about organizing your library, I'll tell you how I've organized mine and what I might recommend that you do. First thing is, you want it to be accessible. In other words, books and videos and things that are put in a box, buried in a basement or in a garage or in a shed, that's not really a part of a library because you can't get at it, you can't use it. So it wants to be accessible so that you can study and use and refer things. Periodically, I grab books off the shelf or go to audios and things because it's like, okay, what was that? Because I can't remember it all, but I want to refer back to it. Number 2, I think that it's important that it be organized, and this is really, it's kind of for functional convenience. So you may lay out things. I'm going to give you a suggested organization for your library. It's a way of thinking about things. It's a structure that works for me. Of course, you can determine what works best for you, but organize it in some form that will allow you to find things conveniently, easily. I believe that it's very important that you have a printed library. Now, we have these wonderful electronic devices, and yes, in the palm of your hand you can have literally tens of thousands of pages, and that's wonderful, and have those things. But for the most critical of the works and some of these reference materials, I believe that you must have a printed copy. That is reliable, it is durable, it is survivable. You know, if the batteries go dead, you have no more access. And you say, well, why would I have dead batteries? Well, there's no power around to charge your device. Those devices can be destroyed through certain things like a coronal mass ejection that sends out quite a wave of power throughout our systems and may knock them out, or an EMP, different things like that, or just drop it in the swimming pool, you know, and that'll take it out. So the printed material, even though it has its own threats, it is not as easily just erased and done away with. So printed to me is important. And even if you have something audio, and I'll mention this to you because one of the things when we're fully functional with things is we're setting up and we have audio and we have video, DVD. With many of these works, there will be a workbook manual. Some of those are being worked on right now. You can take notes in them. You'll have a place for you to see key concepts and ideas and fill in some blanks and all in places to take notes. The other thing that will be done, there will be a transcript of it here again, because the electronic devices may die, but the printed word is going to still be there as long as you preserve the paper. Oh, by the way, there's some very durable paper that we're looking at also. The other thing I believe that's important that you do is you have it prioritized. And one of the reasons for prioritizing these things is, and having it organized in general, is that if you need to, well, evacuate, there's something coming in your direction, you need to get out of the way, there may be some key reference works that you want to take with you. And so you have it prioritized in such a way that you just grab this area of the shelf, or each one of the shelves, this section in here, that's the one that you grab real quick. You don't have to be reading titles and making decisions, because those decisions have been made beforehand. The other thing that will be helpful is to have it in multimedia also. DVD, CD, CD-ROM, and those kinds of things to help with the learning. But I believe everything should be backed up with hard copy transcripts and things like that. Now, when we take a look at my foundation library, there's my entire library list that I have that's in mine. I'm going to be talking about those works. When we talk about the foundation classes that go along with it on the lower right, these are the Safe Harbor Foundation classes, one of which we're doing this evening. Now, a key foundation principle is the law of provident living, and how it relates to the library is what we'll talk about for just a moment, because it's actually a part of how you may want to structure and lay out your library. Now, when we take a look at the law of provident living, which is covered in depth on these other things I mentioned, there's 4 items there: spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and then stuff, material things. And it's in that order of priority. I'm going to come back and talk about a couple of these in just a moment, but that would be a structure that you can think about when you want to have materials put together for the future. Now, what do we mean by spiritual that's within this? Well, I'm not here to teach you from a doctrinal standpoint, but I do want to identify this as a very critical area, because I believe if you skip this or don't pay enough attention to it, that the rest of the things we talk about really don't matter that much in the long run. So for me, it's a very important area. I believe it is for everybody. Now, I will identify my roots and my value system. Again, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to have this, but it is mine, and it's where I'm coming from. That may help you understand why I do some of what I do. I am a Christian. I believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's an important part of my life, and the teaching and principles that are there, I believe, are foundational for everything that I believe in and that I work towards in the future. Within that, we have, of course, scriptures, and one of these scriptures that relates right to this idea of preparedness is 1 Timothy 5:8. But if any provide not for his own, and especially those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. It's a pretty straightforward statement of responsibility to heads of household and people who have taken on that responsibility or been given to them. And it's not just about taking care of our household when life is good and easy. It's about taking care and being prepared to deal with things in the tough times also. Part of the spiritual area, if you haven't seen this and don't have this, I believe you should have it in your library, is America's Godly Heritage. This is a DVD. It is both fascinating, it's extremely revealing, and I think points out perhaps some of the issues that we face right now. Please get that. Please have that. Please share that. And at the end, I will give you a list. In fact, everybody that's registered for this, we have your email. We will automatically email to you this library list that I'm talking about tonight. Anybody that's listening to this after the fact and isn't registered in here, you can make a request for that through Safe Harbor Alliance, and I'll show that again at the very end. Here's another thing that I believe is important. It's about our foundation. This DVD, A More Perfect Union, which is really about the events that went on in creating this country. And I don't mean the war that went on, the War of Independence, but I mean how the Constitution came about and what went into that. And there were some challenges there, because you have men of different beliefs and passions that had to come together. An extraordinary document. This is worth studying and watching. Another one that I find fascinating to read is The Majesty of God's Law. This is the biblical foundation for righteous government. If you want to understand that, and from a biblical standpoint, this is a book worth studying. It's a very scholarly work with an extraordinary amount of reference material through the history of the foundation of this country, but also everything that went on for literally hundreds of years beforehand that made it possible. Well, that's some of my foundation roots and what I believe is very important in the spiritual area. In the law of provident living, we talk about number 2 as being attitude. So what do I mean by that? And this very critical fact that it's number 2 on this list And this is what's going to determine whether you live or die when things get really tough. So let's understand attitude for just a moment. Attitude is this. It is how you emotionally respond or react, and please understand there's a big difference between react and respond, to what is going on around you, especially when things are completely out of your control. So really it's about your actions, your response, your reaction to things that determines what your attitude is. We're kind of talking about your outlook and how you deal with things. And when it gets really, really bad, I believe if you don't have a firm spiritual foundation and you lose your attitude, what happens is you give up, you quit, you don't know what to do, you can't keep going. When things are impossible beyond all measure, people just don't keep going. They just stop. I've heard people say literally in a few situations, I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'm just going to die. And if that happens to be your attitude, unless somebody comes along and rescues your hiney, you're in big trouble. So let's talk about attitude. See, this is one of these foundational things that's so critical. So I believe that it's important to obtain and study an attitude library, and that's what I'll talk about. Now, my number one attitude book, and this is in the area of provident living, and this is one of those books that you must have as far as I'm concerned and study. That book is Deep Survival. And this is a textbook. It is a textbook that is extremely important. And I tell people this, and I refer them to this book very often, I almost didn't buy that book because the title, the cover on it. I looked at that. Deep Survival was an interesting title. I pulled it off the bookshelf in the bookstore. I looked at it, and I thought, oh, another gee whiz, look what I did, Mom, hanging upside down from a rope and how I survived. And so I wasn't totally impressed with that concept. But it was the subtitle on this that got me, and it was Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. And that intrigued me enough that after I'd taken it off the shelf and put it back and forth half a dozen times or so and read the cover page and the back and a few things like that, I bought the book, and I'm so glad that I did. And I tell people, this is the textbook. You need to have this one. I was at a trade show, a presentation here a little while back, and there was a number of people there that were talking about things that they do, and there was a company that does some very hardcore survival instruction. Looked like a good group of people to me. They do things both primitive and not so primitive. And I was talking to the head of this organization. We at the end of this show, and we spent 45 minutes to an hour there. And as we were going along, he mentioned something. He said, there's an extremely important book that people have, and it was something that says Deep Survival. He looked and he said, yes. He says, that is the textbook. It's very important. It is. We've done a book review on that. We'll do that again and have it posted because you need to have that book. And it's not just about having that book, but it's about studying the book. So let me tell you very quickly how you study a book. At least this is what I do, and it's quite effective. Number one, when I get the book, as I did those, I just read it. Just read it. I want to know if it's worth spending any time in, so I just read the book. I read the book and I said, my goodness, there's stuff in here I've got to know. It's answering some questions. It's pointing out things that I wasn't completely clear on, and or it was explaining things. It's kind of like I knew this, but I wasn't sure how it related to other things. And so then you go back and you read the book. In this case, I read it with a highlighter. I want to go back and I want to study it with a highlighter. Now, or you can do it with the red pen, however you do it, underline things. But I go back and I read it in key points. Now then, the next time you read the book, you can go back and just read what you underlined or what you highlighted. That lets you go back through the book very quickly. One of the things that happens oftentimes as you go back and read a book like that is that you may start reading things around it. Why did I highlight that? And then you read before and after. Oh, like I really understand. The next thing I recommend that you do, this book is available as an audio book. And I would recommend that you get an audio of the book, and now then you start listening to it, because you learn differently when you listen. You have different pictures that run in your mind. And then the final way of doing it is you have the book that has your highlights, your notes on the margin, markups and everything. You come back and put on the audio and read the book as you go through the audio, and you start getting a real depth of understanding of these things. Some books are worthy of studying to that level. Deep Survival is. Please do that. Now then, my number 2 attitude book that is vitally important is Miracle in the Andes. And when I give it to you, I would like you to read them in this order. You do Deep Survival, then you do Miracle in the Andes, because you see, this is a real world case study of everything that's being taught by Lawrence Gonzalez in Deep Survival. And as you're reading this book, after having read Deep Survival, as you're going through it, it's kind of like, you can see who's going to die. The people that are not going to make it, the people that are going to lose it for a variety of reasons, because you're starting to understand. You'll understand so much about attitude in this book and how critical it was, about purpose, about focus and commitment, leadership that went on, and also governance that was a part of what we saw happening there. Now, this book, it was an impossible situation, and I think it's important for us to read the impossible and people that go through the impossible in case you find yourself in an impossible situation. If somebody else has survived the impossible, why not you? You know, why not? And it helps us to decide we're going to make it. So this one is also available as an audio, and I'd recommend that you get the audio of it. It would be worthy of studying. Maybe you don't have to study it quite to the depth of Deep Survival. Deep Survival is the principal book to everything, but this one will give you the application of it. What's been interesting is I've referred people again and again to these books and doing it in this order. After they do these 3 books, this number 2 on the list, they come back and they say, I get it. I really, really get it. And I believe that's important, that you get it, is what it's all about. You understand it. Now, my number 3 attitude book in Provident Living is The Raft. Now, this is a classic. My original copy, that green one on the left, I probably read it, I'm guessing, about 1959. I'm in junior high school. And I read it as an adventure book, and it's an extraordinary adventure. It's an adventure in an impossible situation. But how it applies here in particular is that, you see, it's not what you have that will determine whether you make it or not. It's what's inside of you. It's your commitment, your focus. In this book, The Raft, and it's named The Raft because it's 3 Navy airmen who go down in the Pacific in February of 1942, just at the very beginning of World War II. And these 3 guys are in a raft, hence the name. They don't have hardly any supplies. I mean, they're very poorly outfitted. It's most unfortunate. They're in this raft. They go through an extraordinarily tough, miserable, awful situation. It was impossible to survive that, yet they did. So what's important about this is, number 1, because I've already said a couple of times, it's not what you have that's the most important, what you know, what's inside of you. And when you read this book, you'll understand why these guys survived. And when they washed up on the shore of this island, if I remember correctly, this picture that you see them in right there, this was taken about 2 weeks after they had landed there, and they were being fattened up. These guys were in terrible shape. They barely made it another day or 2, and they would have perished. But one of the other things that, let me finish that, is when they washed up on the shores of the island, this is what they had. This was the entire inventory of their possessions in their life. 1 really worn out, beat up raft, 3 men, and a whistle on a chain. They had nothing else. They were terribly burned and chafed and everything. They were naked. You had to read the story to understand how that happened. They didn't want it to happen that way, but that's how it happened, and sometimes it is that way. One of the things that occurred during this book is that they had a discussion at one point. They're in at about day 28 or so, and they had a discussion that said, we're suffering terribly. We're in the middle of this ocean. We're trying to steer ourselves in a direction where we might hit one of these tiny little islands. You know, the chances are really slim. Although I do believe once you've done everything you can do, then you have the right to ask for the hand of Providence to show up. And the hand of Providence was involved in this. But they had this discussion that said, you know, our chances of survival are very slim. We're suffering terribly. Next time we get dumped in the ocean, because that was one of the things that was happening all the time. This raft is the size of a bathtub with 3 guys in it. And it gets tipped over regularly in some of the rough water. And they said, why don't we just not hang on, let go, and just sink away? The struggle will just be a few seconds because they're so tired and exhausted, and we won't hurt any longer. Please understand, in some of these impossible situations, it is much more difficult and painful and hard to stay alive than it is to die. Why did these three men decide to make it? And they did, and we have an extraordinary story of what they went through. You need to know why they decided to keep going. So here's my three books. You need to get them and study them and start really living by them and applying them. By the way, there's other great books and materials to read. I'll talk about a couple more here very briefly. But do them in this order: Deep Survival, Miracle in the Andes, and The Raft. And I believe that you will really start to understand the principles that are being taught in Deep Survival. There's several other books and materials that you can study and read. One of them I talk about briefly is Alfred Lansing's book called Endurance. And this is about Shackleton's extraordinary experience in the Antarctic. This was an impossible situation. You want to talk about controlling of attitude, what he had to do as the leader. And he swore to bring all of his men back. He promised he would, and he did. And the fact that he did, it's amazing that he could have done that. What did he do? How did he do it? How did he maintain the discipline, the focus, the commitment, the attitude to get through this extraordinary situation? As you read the book, you're thinking, boy, there's some people you ought to just get rid of. I mean, this guy is so much, he's not worth it. But you see, Shackleton had made a commitment, and he met that commitment. Another one of these extraordinary books is Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. It's a classic. The story of somebody who was interred in the Nazi concentration camp where conditions were just appalling. And he was asking the question as he went through this, why are there some people that had the somewhat better circumstances? Not that they're wonderful, but they're a little bit better, but they're not making it. And you have some people that are in the absolute worst, and they're making it, and they're living with dignity. He was asking the question, why is that the case? What's the difference between these people? It would be important for you to get that book and read the book and how it applies to everything we're talking about here. Surviving Against All Odds was my attitude course that I released back in, I started teaching it in 1993-94, and then we published it, I believe it was 1996. We are now preparing, it's being re-edited, reworked, and some new updates to it so that the material will match as I teach things right now, and it will be available again in the not too distant future. So you can watch for that. But it's designed to be a class and for you to study with the workbook manual in there and to gain some additional insight. I've had some very nice complimentary letters of people that have had that course in that book. So watch for it. It'll be available in the not too distant future. In the Law of Provident Living, we talked about knowledge, and that would seem to be one of the key parts to having a library. Well, what is knowledge? I have this simple little formula all the time that's K equals I times E. Please understand that knowledge is just not having a collection of information. As a matter of fact, I make this point. Right behind me in my office here, there's bookshelves that have a lot of books on them. Very often we hear somebody say, well, look at all the knowledge that's in a library, in our books. Please understand, there's no knowledge in a book. What's in the book? It's information that's in the book. So what is knowledge? Well, knowledge is information, like things that are in books or videos or classes or this presentation I'm doing. There's information here because I have no way of sharing any knowledge with anybody. The only thing I can share is information. We could call it data if you want. That's what we share. So it's information that is multiplied by experience. You see, when you multiply it by experience, when you take the information, when you do something with it, it becomes a part of you. You begin to internalize it. You understand how and why it works. You understand the principles associated with it. So let's dig into this thing we call knowledge in this Law of Provident Living. Now I break it down into kind of three sections. Again, looking at how do I organize this stuff? How do I organize it and prioritize it? How do I learn from it? Strategy, education, and instruction are the key words that I like to use. So let's talk about strategy for just a moment. What strategy? Well, that's the big picture. That's stepping way back and seeing what the big picture is and all the interrelationships with things. It's kind of like if you want to look from the airplane view, this is the 50,000-foot view, and you're developing kind of the big strategy, the big plan that will deal with all of the issues so that you can get to where you want to go, the outcome that you want. Now, I've heard some people say, if it gets really, really bad, I just want to die and go home. Well, okay, then you don't have to do much if that's the outcome that you want. But if you're somebody that says, I have responsibility, I have stewardship, I have things to do, and family and grandchildren or whatever it is, and so I need to be here and do everything that I can do. Okay, so you have an outcome that says, I want to make it. Then you want to be sure that you're grasping the big picture. And sometimes people prepare for one little thing. You watch some of these TV programs, and somebody's preparing for a nuclear attack, or somebody is preparing for economic collapse, or their main thing is about a chemical warfare. Okay, well, if, being prepared for that will help you in other areas. But if you're focused just in one thing, and that doesn't happen, then you might not be as well prepared in the other areas. And that's why having this big picture outlook is so critically important. So you obtain and study a strategy library. So I'm going to give you what I believe is my strategy library that I would encourage you to get. We'll talk about each one of these things for just a moment. There is a commission report. I don't necessarily recommend that you get this commission report because you can kind of characterize it as printed Novocaine, lots of information in it. It's a report of the Commission to Assess the Threat to the United States from an Electromagnetic Pulse EMP Attack. And if you had a very successful one that was pulled off very well, it's kind of like, what would it be? Well, this is a vital bit of information, but you can get more of the information about what they're talking about in this book, 1 Second After. Now, the report is unusual in its terminology because there's words like devastating and cataclysmic used within it. And one of the things that is predicted in there is said, if they have a very successful EMP attack, during the first year, there will be a 90% die-off of the U.S. population due to violence, starvation, and disease. Now, that's not a happy report, and they can explain why it is in there. But still, how do you get your head around that? Because this is a bunch of statistics and information. Well, 1 Second After puts a human face on the report and what it does, and it helps you to understand the emotions and the feelings. It's based on the commission report. It is in a novel form, meaning that it's written as a novel. It's kind of hopefully it's not a future, events. And it helps you get around the impact, the social impact of a successful EMP attack. It is not a book on how to deal with EMP in terms of how to repair and what to do. It will help you understand, if you're not prepared, what can happen, and even for those people who are prepared, how tough it can be. Because remember, what that report said is the social impact in this country with a worst case scenario EMP attack that's very successful is that we can have an 80% die-off of the population. That's extraordinary, and the social impact is amazing. And this book was actually written to help people understand how bad it would be if we're unprotected and unprepared, with the hopes that we won't be unprotected and unprepared, so that those who would like to do this will look and say, it's not worth it because we can't hurt them enough and they're going to come clean our clocks. This author also takes on some very difficult questions that I haven't seen anyone else deal with so thoroughly. They are gnarly, difficult questions. They are worth considering. So it's an important book. Now, a lot of times when I've referred people to the book, I've been like, oh man, they're going to get into this book and just close it and go like, I can't go here. And some people do, by the way, because you get into the book, he deals with things very realistically. It's extraordinarily well written. It's very engaging. It's one of those things that's hard to put down because it's like, oh my goodness, what next? And how are they dealing with these kinds of things? But some people get into it a little ways and say, I can't go here, and they close the book. And that's okay. I mean, you can't force anybody to read the book, but I would encourage that you do, that you go all the way through it. My only warning is a little bit, there is some language in there, very much the way people speak. It's not laced with profanity, and by the way, there's no torrid sex scenes or any of those kinds of things, but people under heavy-duty, life-threatening misery stress, sometimes they speak a little bit differently. So there is some of that language that may be somewhat offensive, but to me it's like, well, that's life. I don't encourage that. I try not to speak French myself like that, but sometimes that can be a part of life. So I just warn you a little bit and deal with it as would be kind of my approach. And what I did do as I was going through the book, there were certain words that I'm just going to cross that one out. It's just like it's not going to be there for me. Another book to consider having is When Technology Fails by Matthew Stein. And I've interviewed him on our Tuesday night programs that we've done. Those will be posted, and then in the future on the new website, you'll be able to have access to them. We've got all those things gathered. They're being compiled so they can go up. And the first part of this book is really about, what's the technology? What's the threat? What's the risk? Now, you may agree or disagree with some of those things. But you see, that's a strategy, but it's because it helps you get the big picture of what possibly could happen. And then if you've read something like 1 Second After, you're going like, wow, it doesn't have to be an EMP for it to be really bad. That's just one of the things that could make it tough. Another thing I consider that you should get is this DVD. This DVD that was done by the History Channel after Armageddon. Now, it's not for the technical know-how that you get this book. And by the way, there's a few very misleading things in there. There's some technical bad mistakes as far as I'm concerned. So you don't watch this to say, oh, I'm going to know what to do after we have something terrible happen. In this case, it was after a pandemic that wiped out a major portion of the population that centers around a family that's in Los Angeles. What I want you to watch it for is the emotions of the people and some of the decision making that they went through. And in some cases, you're going to look at them and say, well, why are they doing that? They're idiots. Don't do that. And particularly if you have some of the technical understanding, you'll recognize a few mistakes that are in there that the producers of this should have known better as far as I'm concerned. But it's the emotion. You see, the reason I want you to consider the emotion, the reason that 1 Second After is so important, the reason this is important, is that you can be given all the statistics, like in When Technology Fails or other books that are talking about some of the threats, and you read them and you go like, okay, wow, I see that. But unless you have a feeling about it, you don't do anything. You see, people do not act on what they know. People act on how they feel about what they know. And so it's about having the proper kind of feeling about the true and correct information that will help you do the right things versus having an attitude that says, well, that won't happen to this country or not here, we're too strong or we're too smart or we've learned so much since the 1918 pandemic or whatever it is, and so we're just not going to see those kinds of happen. And so you deny it, and then you get the results of denying. So that's why I recommend some of these things. It's not for the technical side of it, it's the feeling. Here's another one that has some feeling about it. Again, it's one of those that you may have already seen, but after studying some of these things, it's really helpful to go back, because now it's not just watching this from the adventure standpoint, but it really is from the emotional, psychological standpoint, and some of the things that he went through and some of the mistakes that were there. I remember while I'm watching this thing in the theater, and I saw some of the things coming, like it's the Swiss Army knife on the keychain that's left in the keys of the car, and I'm going like, okay, this is going to be trouble, because you don't leave your knife behind, it goes with you. And so he leaves that behind, and of course later on I'm going like feeling in my right pocket in there, and yep, there it is, and it's on the lanyard, so I can't lose it. And then some of you know this in past presentations, I have this toolkit that I carry with me all the time, that's in my either hip pocket or on a cargo pocket. And I was feeling around for that and said, yep, there it is. I had tools in it that he really needed. And hence I've named that the Castaway Kit in honor of that movie. We'll do the class on the Castaway Kit here in the future. Another one to consider watching is The Postman. Now, I warn people here, this is R-rated. I typically do not watch R-rated things. I don't want to go there. I didn't know it was R-rated. I picked it up in the kind of in the middle of it when it was on cable TV, and there's a few rough spots in there. It's mostly about some of the violence and things, But however, remember the commission report, EMP, 80% of the population will die due to starvation, violence, disease. Well, this does depict some of that, so it might be worth watching. Now, here's something very instructive and very positive to be watching. This was done by PBS in their video series they did. It's called Colonial House. And you see the technology, here it is, they're taking people in our modern society who have volunteered to go back to this little colony and live with the technology that people had back in that period of time when the colonies were being established. And boy, it's instructive, and you're looking like, oh man, I hope I don't have to live that way, because that's pretty tough, as a matter of fact. Hopefully we don't go back that far. But also the young people and teenagers and people who are put into it, some of the emotions and the governance and the government and how they're trying to lead and those kinds of things, they were challenged, and these people could bail, and they knew they could bail. And of course some of them do along the way. They're like, I'm just not going to do this anymore, this is too much pain. What if you're in a situation where you can't bail? This is something that's extremely important for you to own and to watch as a family. Now, hopefully we don't go back technology quite that far. I would rather be where the technology is more along the line of the frontier house. Same kind of an idea where you have these modern families who volunteer to go live in a 1880s frontier setting with 1880s technology. Very, very instructive for those people, and it'll be very instructive for you. And you see, while I'm watching or reading things, I'm asking the question, what if I was there? What would I do? How would I react? How would I respond? Do I know what to do with these things? And I find that very, very enlightening to ask those questions. Of course, as you watch these people, and some of them, I remember them, some of them sneaking off and cheating, if you will, because they needed their comfort foods, their chocolate or those kinds of things. And so they're out trading with the other natives in the area there, the modern people. It's very, very instructive. And it was hard on those people. This is not an easy thing to do. What if it was for real? What if you didn't have, this is a volunteered thing we're going to do for 3 months and then we can go home? Another one that would be worth watching is the 1900 house, a little higher level of technology, and what these people were dealing with and how they were living. These 3 videos are really, really useful. Please get them. I would recommend. Now, another book, this is a classic, written 1959, Alas, Babylon, by Pat Frank. It's about the aftermath and how people are trying to survive after a thermonuclear exchange, the big war, which, by the way, is very unlikely to happen. Now, nuclear detonations, yes, that's pretty well promised, and it's likely to occur. Hope it doesn't. Want to do everything we can to avoid it. But the all-out war like this, probably not. But yet it's the emotions that you read this book for, not the technical expertise of what to do, although there's some clever things that are presented in there. And another one to read that's a classic, going back another 10 years, 1949, if I remember correctly, Earth Abides. This really is about pandemic and where the, 90 or 95% of the world's population is wiped out, and what would it be like. And one of the things that's very interesting in this, and this is where one of the ideas that I talk about is library, because he does talk about the libraries and how they're corroding and rotting away, and all the information that's in there that's being lost, and there isn't people using those things that don't understand how to apply it and externalize it and make it work, and how the technology is kind of crumbling. These are all worthy of consideration. Even though you look at them and some people say, oh, this is all fiction and those kinds of things, these authors were deep thinkers, and they considered some things that are worthy of taking a look at. All right. That was all in the strategy area. That's getting the big picture. Now we step into this thing I call education, and how it's, see, we're kind of working through the library from the 50,000 foot view and keeping that 50,000 foot view in mind. Now we step down to the 10,000 foot view. We're getting a little closer to things. This is where education comes in. And this is where you start developing the understanding And the more details of these interrelated tools and skills and supplies and the emotional kinds of things, the psychological, the mental and things. Because remember, in the strategy section, you set out and said, well, here's the outcome I want. Here's the big picture of all the things I may be dealing with. Now we need more details. And this is where you start becoming educated. But this is not the hands in the dirt quite yet. That comes a little bit later. That's the instruction. So this is education. So obtain and study an education library. Here's what I consider to be my education library. I'd recommend that you have. This one, the Making the Best of Basics, the Family Preparedness Handbook. By the way, we'll have posted here in the near future kind of a video review of this one. This book is great for people that are just beginning because it's an excellent getting started resource, and it has, if you need to check off lists and tell me how much of this, and I'm going to write it down and check off that I have that going to the other thing that some people need that. This is a great book for that because it's filled with these charts and things. If you're somebody who's more advanced and been working at these things, this will also work exceptionally well for you as a reference book, because it's full of tables and charts and lists of additional training and information and products and people that you can go to and websites and all kinds of things like that. So it's an excellent resource book for the beginner as well as somebody who is quite advanced and has been doing these things for a long period of time. A lot of education, but again, you see one book that may have, I don't know, what does it have, 600-700 pages in it. You know, it still can't cover everything, but it can get you started and organize things in a way to help you in your thinking. Here's a book that's important, but the challenge with this book, the Nuclear War Survival Skills, is nuclear war, because it's like, well, I don't want to go there. So if you take nuclear war and you kind of fade it out, this book is full of vital survival skills for all kinds of situations. Although, yes, it is the classic one to help you be prepared and to survive any kind of nuclear event that may occur, whether it's a nuclear attack or it is radiation leaks or spills or things like that. Crescent Kearney wrote the classic, and it's very, very important to have this book and all the different things that it covers. So I'd recommend that you get it and study this book also. It has things that are very practical. They're low cost. They're expedient. It's not about having, you know, you'll watch one of these TV programs on right now called, you know, Doomsday Bunkers. You know, okay, I'd like to have a $450,000 Doomsday bunker that's outfitted too. I don't have one. You know, if I had the money, I probably would, but I don't. And in that program, they make the point, well, if you don't have this, you're going to die. That's not true. That's a salesman's pitch, but it's not true. But you do need to understand what to do and how to do it and why to do it. This book will help you with that also. Now then, another book to get, Basic Country Skills. This is an excellent practical guide, nicely illustrated. Now, some of these books, they have a lot of overlap in them. I know that. But they come out a little bit differently. Some books have one thing, another book doesn't have it at all, has a different illustration or a drawing. You read one of them, you go like, I can't quite figure that one out. You look in the other one that's talking about the same thing, you go like, oh, I get it there. And there isn't one that is the perfect book. So that's why I recommend that you have a series of these and you can refer to the different ones as you need to. The Encyclopedia of Country Living, it's another one that is excellent. Same kind of an idea that has all this reference material, and it touches on many, many things. So it fits in very, very well within this library. Back to Basics. Beautifully illustrated, a lot more color illustrations and pictures in here. And each one of these books kind of promotes itself as being the complete guide. Well, it's pretty complete, but I believe you need all of them in order to get it really covered and get it covered well. Here's another one, Country Wisdom and Know-How. This one's actually kind of one of the harder books to deal with because it is it's in a large format. It doesn't fit on your bookshelf very well, unfortunately. And the print is kind of small, but it's jammed full of stuff. And here again, it's going to cover things the other books don't cover. Yeah, excuse me for just a moment here because I'm still, you know, in this recovery mode, and the voice has been a little bit ragged, and I'm having to deal with that, so I apologize for some of the pauses. At least I have a mute that I can mute out the hacking up the hairball. So anyway, we forge ahead anyway. This book, though, Country Wisdom Know-How, is worth having because it has so much in it. But the illustrations are not as good as the other books, but it has some things that are absolutely not in the other books. So here again, I recommend that you have those 4 books in particular. They're kind of the encyclopedias of these skills, this education area that you need. Here's another one. This is a DVD that we have, an evacuation kit to leave by. It's the answer to the 72-hour kit that really doesn't work. And I would recommend that you get this DVD from Safe Harbor Alliance. Some other books that again, on these kind of the bigger picture education area, 98.6 by Cody London, and When All Hell Breaks Loose. 98.6 is about, you're off in the sticks and in the woods and you got caught out there. What should you be doing to prepare yourself so, you do make it out? And how do you survive? And he does some things in that book that I don't see any other authors do very well at all, or not even mention at all. The reason it's titled 98.6, he's talking about maintaining your core temperature. He talks about hyperthermia, which is heat stroke, and he talks about hypothermia, which is, slipping into a coma because you're freezing to death. You don't want to go either way on there. So it is ultimately about maintaining that core temperature and all the things that go into allowing that to happen. An important book in this area of becoming educated about how to survive. Instruction, when we're talking about instruction at the moment. This is with that big picture in mind, along with the commitment to the outcome of what you've wanted to do, but now it's getting in and really developing the practices, the skills, the details, the processes, the methods. You see, this is hands in the dirt. We went from 50,000 feet to 10,000 feet to your hands are in the dirt. This is learning all the details and how to do things in great detail. So the instruction, well, you want to obtain and study and have an instruction library. Now, this is going to be a rather large library because each one of these areas we've been talking about is has several books, even a whole series of books that would be a part of them. So I'm not going to go through that in great depth because as we go into these other areas, you'll start to see them come to the surface. Then the law of provident living, if you remember, number 4 was about stuff. It's about the right stuff in the right order. And you see, when you have the spiritual foundation in place, when you have the correct attitude, and when you have a principle-based knowledge and understanding, that is when you start getting the right stuff. Now, one of the things I'd recommend you do online, there is a class you can listen to. Your 72-hour kit could kill you. It's something that I published back in 1997. I was doing a civil defense training, and we captured the audio from that. I was going through a 72-hour kit, a typical 72-hour kit, and just tearing it apart and saying, here's some of the issues and problems. Now, the good news is you can listen to that for free online. You simply go to Safe Harbor Alliance, and there's a slider there or a picture, a place where you can link into, and you'll be able to listen to that. You can also get it on CD if you want, but you don't have to pay for it. And listen to this. Now, in that class that I had earlier, the evacuation kit to live by, that one also has at the end of it, your 72-hour kit could kill you. It's been redone as a part of this DVD, explaining these things even further. There's a lot of places to get stuff, and as you look around, the internet's full of them, and there's catalogs and layman's and places like that. So what it comes down to is having that spiritual foundation, having the right attitude and the knowledge and understanding of things, then you'll end up with the right stuff because you'll find them, you'll build them, you'll make them. So here is my key foundation library list. And as I said, all of you that have registered for this class, we have your email. We will send this to you automatically. And for those of you that are listening to this post it online afterwards. You can make the request for this foundation library list through info@safeharboralliance.com. We'll get it to you. And in the future, we'll probably have it posted also so you can download it automatically, but not all those things are in place yet. Well, let's go into the stuff. I mean, that's where we are. We're talking about stuff. So clothing is, of course, is one of them. What's clothing? Personal portable shelter. This is your first, and it's your first most important line of defense against the, the climate out there, the weather, the conditions, and it's about comfort and safety. It's not about style. Well, these books we've been talking about, every one of them has some information about clothing in it. There's a little bit of instruction in different areas, so you'll find some of it there. But then we have at Safe Harbor our clothing classes that we teach. Some of them are online, others are on DVD, some of them are taught live, so watch for those things. There may be other books in greater depth that you want. It's about how to spin. What if we need to go back to that level of technology? There'll be some people that will have the skill and the ability to do that. And then how to use the things that we may have spun, and the knitting and the crocheting and building things. Find books that would work well for you. Practice these things. Join groups and clubs so that you can work together and learn some of them. About sewing, because it's about being able to make as well as maintain and repair. And I'm looking for some of these books. I'm not the one to evaluate them. I have somebody, a couple of people that will be evaluating books and make their best recommendations. But clothing is one of the 9 modules, if you remember. Then we have water, which is the liquid of life. And you need to be prepared for the time when the pipes go dry and all the stuff around you is contaminated. Once again, all these books that we've been looking at in this library, they have some details on water, but they don't always have all the details you need. Hence, we have a series of classes, the water classes. There's a number of them, and we've done those here, and we'll be publishing more of those, and some of the details like making your own drip filters. What are some of the options? If you can't afford to buy something, do you have an option? If what you've bought you've now used up or it's been broken, what can you do? It's backing up your backup of backup, so we talk about those kinds of things. Sanitation, a critically important area that most people are very poorly prepared to deal with. I call it a deadly disaster, and frankly, it's hidden. It's right in front of us, but we just don't understand how extraordinarily dangerous it is. And if you remember, in that commission report, talking about EMP, but it doesn't have to be EMP that occurs. You have people that are going to die off because of disease and sickness. That's mostly about sanitation issues, and that will really ravage populations. Well, these books all have some information about and some details on sanitation, but I haven't found the definitive work on that yet. That's why we have the classes that I teach and the things that we're publishing, and that includes this series of the sanitation series of 4 DVDs, 4 hours. There's additional books that you may look for, a few of them that I found about making some of your own soaps and own formulas and things like that, some alternative ways of doing things. And in the sanitation classes, we talk in greater depth about that. Nutrition is one of these areas because you become what you eat and drink. So you want to have a lot of instruction in this area. And correct nutrition is, in fact, the key to our long-term survival in good times and in hard times. Well, all these books we've talked about, they've got some details on nutrition, but you're going to need more. Things like this DVD, if you haven't seen this, get it. Food Matters is extremely important because it really is about how critical having good nutrition is and some of the challenges we may have in our modern American diet, some of the things that are added and some of the things that are left out. And the library that I have, and when we do the nutrition areas, we'll present that library to you. And then on the lower right, you see nutrition classes. There's quite a number of those that we do. In the area, when you talk about the library, here are some of the books. I won't do a review on them right now because we don't have time. There's some great books available out there to help you with some of these, the skills and the understanding. And there's some wonderful books on some basic things. In fact, it's like the 1896 Boston School Cookbook. Boy, that's instructive because you didn't just go to the store and buy certain things. You made them. Teaches you how to make them. So there's books like that that are really useful, and they're all in print. You can get every one of them. In the nutrition library, we talk about producing food, and this is where it comes into my #1 book. If you could only have one gardening, production book, it would be The Resilient Gardener, Carol Depp. I did extensive interviews with her, a neat lady, and very, very important book. There's other books you'll want to have that will add to that we'll talk about when we do the nutrition and the production area. In that library, I'll go through them in depth. The Small-Scale Poultry Flock as being one of the poultry books that you absolutely want to have, some others to consider. And for some people, ducks may be a good choice. And then other things about how do you preserve your foods. If you don't have refrigeration, we don't have electricity, fermentation, other kinds of preservation that you have, root cellaring, drying, culturing of all kinds of foods are really important. So we'll talk about those in the instructions in this nutrition area. Shelter. Each one of these books contains details on shelter, but I haven't found the definitive work on shelter, hence we do some classes. And there's some great information out there in the websites and in some of the online and YouTubes in those areas. I work on collecting those things, and then also have our own series of classes. Wellness, it's vitality of body, mind, and soul. And these details, these instruction areas are really important because it is about taking care of and nurturing all of you. So these books we already mentioned, they have some details in there, but you need more. And that's where I have my wellness library that I'll present to you when we do the wellness areas. And then there's the wellness classes that we present also. Prescription for Nutrition Healing is one of them that's extremely important to have, and it's my wife's kind of the first book she goes to when we're trying to get questions answered in areas of health and healing and want to come at it from a nutrition standpoint. Then you have the tools which we use to maintain and repair and create. And tools are scattered throughout all these other areas in here. And each one of these books we've already talked about has some things about tools, but yet there's more that you need to learn and do and have. So I do some classes, and I have my own library, and that library includes things like there's several magazines I recommend that you get. Mother Earth News is one of them, Backwoods Homes, and there's several magazines, and you can get a lot of these things now on disc, although what I'm doing with my discs is I'm going through and I'm printing things out, because if I can't read the disc, I've lost the information, so having a printout. Books like this, Northern Bushcraft, that's both about the skills, which is a lot about tools also. Home Power, and some other great publications. This is where you get the detailed instruction in the tools area. And then in the supplies, the same kind of thing. Supplies are things we use and consume and replenish, and they're used throughout all of these other areas. We have supplies throughout them. And so each one of these books we've already mentioned has some details in it about supplies, but you may want to learn more, and that's why I go into depth with some of the classes that we have. Well, I hope this helps you understand about library in general and about the foundation library, which is about your head and heart. So the question that I always ask is, will you live providently? Well, the choice is yours. Each one of us can make those choices. And it is by making provisions in all of these areas we've been talking about, all 9 of them and the different divisions within them, that will allow us to face the future with hope, with confidence. You see, I don't believe it's about doing this stuff out of fear and out of trepidation. Fear can be a little bit motivating to get you started. It's like, oh my goodness, if that happens, what are we going to do? Well, now let's just do something about that. Let's get that solved. So now then, when you think about that in the future, you're like, okay, if that happens, that's inconvenient as heck, but I know what to do. We've made provisions for that. You see, I believe the truth about life is this, that there is no doubt that tomorrow will come, and there's no dispute that things happen. But how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, that no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. I'd much rather have an adventure than some miserable survival experience that maybe you make it, maybe you don't, and it's kind of in doubt all along the way. That's just not fun. There's some macho guys that may want to do that, but I'm not going to sign up for that one. So I believe in preparing for the future in a very positive way. So true preparedness has to be based on principles. It's not just about skills and things to buy and practice and play with, because what you know is far more important than what you have. What's inside of your head who you are, what you stand for. And I hope you understand that even better having looked at this foundation library. You see, preparedness, I believe, is a lifestyle. I like to call it provident living or self-reliant living. And it's about taking the information that you've been given here. It's about the information in the books. And it's about getting it out of the books and inside of you, getting the class information, go out there and test and try. And I like to talk about having fun with these things. It's about playing with things. It's about experimenting and getting experience and making it part of your lifestyle now. There's a lot of things I do. Some things I do because, well, I kind of have to. You know, I have to fix them because there's no other way. In other cases, you know, it's like, well, I could replace that, but let me see if I can fix it first. And now's the time to learn to do things. Now's the time to make mistakes and break things and wear them out so that you're prepared to deal with it when you can't just run down to the hardware store or the grocery store. So go and do weird things. That's what I do. I test, I try, I play with things, and it's with family is the most important. And for me, it's about with those grandchildren and getting them out there and helping them get some experience and be okay with themselves. Well, this continues our class on this library, and so the ball is in your court now. We're doing our very best to bring you information and teaching and training. You see, there's free classes every week. We have our audio cast every Tuesday night presenting, and most of the time it'll be people that I interview or one of our other hosts will interview and talk to them, bring you expertise and book reviews and people that have done things that perhaps you and I have not done. I enjoy that Tuesday night a great deal because I get to have people instruct me. We have our Wednesday video cast that we do each Wednesday right here, and you're participating in that, or you're watching it after the fact because you were unable to attend Wednesday nights. And that's where we have our free public video archive under the webcasts, and you go to past webcasts, and there they are. That's where this one will be posted in the near future. That's where you find some of the others I've been talking about already. And then we also have our newsletter that you want to register for. It'll keep you apprised of some of the classes and courses, but also as things launch and become available, you'll learn about them there. So join us at Safe Harbor Alliance. Register, come to classes and those things. Well, as I mentioned, my foundation library list, this thing that we've been talking about, we will send it to everybody. We have your email. It'll come to you so that you'll have what I've been talking about, the reference to them. If you're listening to this after the fact, if it isn't posted someplace where you can find it associated with this, we'll have links and things in the future. But if it's not there yet, then just send a request to info@safeharboralliance.com and we can email that to you. Well, this is Jim Phillips with Safe Harbor Alliance, wishing you the best of this evening, the rest of this week, and I will see and be talking to you folks online next week. Have a great evening. We'll visit with you all again, and good night.